You've heard the promise a million times, right? Cut taxes for the wealthy, and those benefits will trickle down and help everyone. But is that what really happens? I mean, do these policies actually create growth for all of us, or do they just, make the rich richer? Well, today we're going to cut through all the political noise and look at 50 years of cold, hard data. So, to get to the bottom of this, we're diving into a massive study from the Socioeconomic Review. And these guys did the work. They analyzed half a century of data across 18 different countries. And their conclusion, which you can see right here, basically throws a huge wrench in the entire trickle-down theory. Let's unpack what they found out. All right, so first things first. What exactly is this trickle-down promise we hear so much about? Let's just quickly nail down the theory that's been shaping tax policy around the globe for decades. On paper, the logic kind of makes sense, right? When wealthy people and big companies pay less in taxes, they have a lot more cash on hand to invest. They can build new factories, they can fund cool startups, they can hire more people, and all that activity, in theory, is supposed to create jobs and raise wages for everybody. You know, that classic "a rising tide lifts all boats" idea? It's a really compelling story, but the big question is, does it actually hold up? But here's the thing, as one person on Reddit put it so well, the public debate around this stuff often feels totally driven by politics, not by facts. And that confusion makes it really hard for any of us to know what's actually true. So, to cut through that, we need to understand the specific tool that governments use to make these tax breaks happen in the first place. So to really test this trickle-down idea, we have to look under the hood and see how these tax breaks are actually delivered. Because governments often use this very specific tool that, well, it isn't always what it seems. The key term here is tax expenditure. Now, I know it sounds super technical, but the idea is actually pretty simple. It's basically government spending that's hidden inside the tax code. So instead of, say, mailing a company a check, the government just lets them pay less in taxes if they do something specific, like investing in new machinery. And you can see the difference really clearly here. On the left, you have direct spending. That's obvious, right? It's a line item in a budget. But a tax expenditure, on the right, it accomplishes the exact same goal, just through a tax break. The economic outcome might be identical, but one looks like government spending and the other looks like a tax cut. And that political difference, well, it's everything. So why is this approach so popular with politicians? Well, research from the Urban Institute explains it's basically a political magic trick. It allows them to push for their policy goals, like boosting investment, while at the same time telling voters they're cutting taxes and shrinking government spending. It's a total win-win, at least when it comes to how things look. Okay, so now that we get the tool, let's get back to the big question. Do these policies actually work? It's time to look at the results of that landmark study we mentioned, the one that analyzed 50 years of tax cuts across 18 different developed countries. The first thing the researchers looked at was economic growth, measured by GDP per capita. I mean, this is the heart of the trickle-down promise, that these cuts are going to make the whole economic pie bigger for everyone. And after analyzing all that data, they found the effect was, yep, not significant. Statistically, it was basically zero. After sifting through 50 years of data, the researchers found no real evidence that these huge tax cuts for the rich boosted economic growth. The pie, as it turns out, didn't really get any bigger. Okay, but what about the second part of the promise? Creating jobs. Surely these cuts have to lower unemployment, right? Well, the researchers looked at that too. And once again, they found the effect was not significant. No measurable impact on the unemployment rate. Not in the short term, not in the medium term. So, if these policies didn't boost growth and they didn't create jobs, did they do anything at all? Well, yes. The study found one area where major tax cuts for the rich had a huge, statistically significant effect. This was the result. On average, within just 5 years of a major tax cut for the wealthy, the top 1% saw their slice of the national income go up by 0.7 percentage points. So this reveals a very direct, very measurable consequence. The money didn't trickle down, it flowed up. And look, this wasn't just a one-time blip. This effect actually grew over time. As you can see in the chart, the income share for that top 1% just kept on growing in the years after the tax cut. This suggests a permanent shift in how the economic pie was getting divided up. So why does this happen? The researchers suggest that when top executives and other high earners have lower tax rates, they have a much bigger incentive to bargain really aggressively for higher pay. And this behavior funnels more money to the top, but it doesn't actually create any new value for the economy. It just moves the money around, upwards. So let's bring this all together. We started with this really popular theory, and now we've looked at 5 decades of actual evidence. How does the promise stack up against reality? Well, the verdict from this incredibly comprehensive, multi-decade, multi-country analysis is pretty clear. The central idea that tax cuts for the rich will eventually trickle down and benefit everybody else is just not supported by the historical record. So what's the ultimate takeaway here? The evidence over the last half-century is pretty consistent. Tax cuts for the wealthy have failed to deliver on their promise of economic growth or more jobs. Instead, their main, measurable effect was to funnel a lot more income to the very top. And that's the invisible cost of that political magic trick we talked about earlier. And all of this leaves us with a final, really important question to think about. If all the evidence shows that these policies don't achieve their stated economic goals for society as a whole, why do they stay so popular among policymakers? What does that tell us about their real purpose?